The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs and restless shifting as people filed into their seats. It was just another day in court, another case on the schedule. No one expected anything extraordinary. The clerk called the names of the parties involved, and a middle-aged woman stood up slowly from the bench. She wore a plain, faded green dress and clutched a worn leather folder to her chest. Her hair was tied back simply, her eyes calm but serious. She looked like someone who belonged more in a village kitchen than a courtroom. There were soft snickers from the back rows. Even the court guard raised an eyebrow, amused by the sight of this modest woman walking alone toward the front. No lawyer walked beside her, no assistant held her papers. She stood alone, dwarfed by the formality of the setting around her. The opposing lawyer, a well-dressed man in a sleek black suit, stood confidently with his client. He leaned slightly toward the bench and whispered, "This won't take long." His client chuckled. The judge, flipping through the case file, glanced up. "Mrs. Farrow," the judge said, peering over his glasses, "are you representing yourself today?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, her voice clear though soft. "You are aware that the other party is represented by a professional attorney?" "I am." The judge paused for a moment, as if waiting for her to reconsider, but when she said nothing more, he gave a slight nod. "Very well. Let us proceed." As the first statements began, the courtroom atmosphere seemed to shift into a quiet tension. The lawyer for the opposing side took center stage. He spoke with practiced charm and precision, presenting his client's side of the dispute. His words flowed smoothly, filled with legal jargon and polished rhetoric. He kept throwing glances at Mrs. Farrow, as if to make sure she was following. At one point, he even turned toward her and said, "I hope you're taking notes. You'll want to remember this." A small ripple of laughter moved through the benches. Mrs. Farrow didn't react. She simply sat still, her folder resting on her lap, her fingers lightly gripping the edges. She watched and listened, her expression unreadable. After 20 minutes of statements, evidence presentation, and subtle jabs aimed at Mrs. Farrow's lack of counsel, the lawyer returned to his seat, satisfied. The judge turned his eyes toward her. "Mrs. Farrow, do you have anything you would like to present at this time?" She rose quietly. Her shoes made a soft sound against the polished floor as she walked toward the center of the room. There was no dramatic entrance, no powerful stride. Just calm, steady steps. She looked directly at the judge, then around the courtroom. Many eyes were on her, some bored, some curious, a few amused. She opened her folder and carefully removed a few neatly arranged sheets of paper. But she didn't speak just yet. The opposing lawyer leaned over to his client again, whispering something with a slight grin. His client laughed, louder this time. Mrs. Farrow heard them. Everyone did, but her eyes never moved in their direction. She held her papers in both hands, glanced at them once, and seemed to take a breath. But still she said nothing. It was as if she was waiting for something. The judge cleared his throat, prompting her to begin. She looked up, and then, for just a brief second, her lips twitched. A tiny smile, more like a flicker of understanding, crossed her face. But she said only, "Your Honor, I am prepared to respond." The judge nodded again. "Proceed." And just as she opened her mouth to speak, the lights in the courtroom flickered briefly, as if fate itself was pausing for effect. She didn't flinch. Her posture was still perfect, her voice about to rise. But we'll come to that. Because in this moment, this exact, suspended breath in time, no one in that room truly knew what was about to unfold. They saw her as a simple woman, probably confused, probably outmatched. No degree, no law firm, no expensive suit. Just her. And that was their first mistake. Mrs. Farrow lifted her eyes to the judge, then gently placed the first paper on the podium in front of her. The courtroom was silent now, the earlier giggles and whispers gone. Even the opposing attorney leaned forward slightly, suddenly unsure whether he had underestimated the woman too soon. "My name is Eleanor Farrow," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I may not be a lawyer, but I've spent the last 4 months studying every part of this case. Every law, every precedent, every overlooked document. What I lack in legal status, I've made up for in sleepless nights and honest research. The judge nodded slowly, motioning for her to continue. She held up a highlighted paper. Your Honor, what the opposing counsel failed to mention is Exhibit C, a document that proves my late husband's original agreement with the seller was still legally binding. This contract was never voided, and here, she tapped the page, is the clause that grants us rightful claim to the property in dispute. The lawyer across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. But that document was, he started. Overlooked in your filings, she interrupted gently, and yet it was attached to the original deed transfer, which I've already had verified by the local land office. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have confirmation? She handed over a stamped letter. Certified 2 weeks ago. A soft murmur spread across the benches. Mrs. Farrow didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply kept going, piece by piece, calmly exposing holes in the opposing lawyer's arguments. She referenced case law from a 2004 ruling, quoted state legislation word for word, and even pointed out a minor error in the opposing side's timeline, an error that shifted liability completely. Every time she finished a point, the courtroom grew quieter. The confidence of the suited attorney faded, his charm replaced with unease. He scribbled notes, trying to recover, but it was clear he hadn't expected this. And the judge saw it all. After 30 minutes of calmly delivered, ironclad reasoning, Mrs. Farrow stepped back. That is all, Your Honor. The judge looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the opposing attorney. Would you like to respond? The lawyer stood, cleared his throat, but then shook his head. No, Your Honor. The silence was loud. The judge adjusted his glasses, reviewed the documents again, then set them down. I have to admit, he said slowly, I did not expect such a well-prepared, articulate, and legally sound argument from a self-representing party. Mrs. Farrow, your presentation was not only accurate, it was exceptional. He turned slightly, now addressing the entire room. Let this courtroom be reminded, intelligence, preparation, and truth are not reserved for those with expensive suits or elite degrees. Today, justice was served, not by a professional attorney, but by a widow who chose not to be silenced. The final decision was swift. The case was ruled in Mrs. Farrow's favor. She had not only defended her rights, she had done it with grace, dignity, and undeniable brilliance. As the judge exited the courtroom, people began to rise. Some looked at her in awe. Others, who had once laughed, now avoided her eyes. And the opposing lawyer, red-faced and humbled, quietly gathered his papers and left without another word. Mrs. Farrow didn't celebrate. She didn't smile broadly or raise her arms in victory. She simply collected her folder, now a little less worn and far more meaningful, and walked out, head high, shoulders steady. Outside, a breeze moved through the courthouse steps. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, James," speaking to the memory of her husband. And then, with quiet strength, she walked away, having taught the world a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Never underestimate a quiet mind, and never mistake simplicity for weakness.